the 7.62 by 54 millimeter rimmed round. So obviously 54 millimeter case, rim on the case head there. It's not the oldest still around, but it is by far the most successful vintage cartridge out there. 1888 for the original version of the 303 round, the Mark 1. 1891 for the 7.62 by 54. You'll see they are almost identical in overall length. Bullet profile and weight similar. Flat-based bullet on this to begin with, but still. They both have a rim. You know, they are absolutely equivalent Victorian military rifle rounds. It's just that 7.62 by 54 was the superior round. I'm sorry to say, it was. That's why it's still around today. It doesn't mean it's the best thing now, but it was at that time. This is an example from 1896. So this is well, it's as old as they go in this collection, at least. There will be older out there, of course, adopted in 1891. But this is a very nice, good condition vintage example, such as you would expect in a museum like this, complete with sling, which is nice. So the advantages of this are limited. And I think they come down to that cartridge. This thing is still, it competes on a level with any general purpose rifle or machine gun cartridge out there. It's more than powerful enough for most applications. Its only limitation is that rim. The rim's not an issue in this manually operated rifle, that it was absolutely designed 100% for. There's no compromise in, no difficulty in designing around this, because this is what this was meant to shoot. And there are so many of these around and so many of these around that it's going to get picked up and used in conflict zones where it exists, and it exists in huge numbers in Russia and in Ukraine, of course. There are just so many produced. 2 world wars. You know, it's been around for well over 100 years, mass produced through 2 world wars. Millions of them around. Really, the only disadvantage to this round, I mean, obviously there are ballistically superior rounds out there, but the only true disadvantage to this is that rim on the back, which was traditional. Cartridges typically had a rim up to that point to allow the case to be hooked out. Once you fired, there was no disadvantage to having a rim sticking out until there was. However, this whole idea of cartridges jamming rim over rim, now this is a 303 and a 7.62, but you see the problem. If the rim on one of them gets behind the one below, it can't go anywhere, and you get a rim jam, or rim lock as it's sometimes called. Now, one way around that was developed for this weapon, the DP, the Degtyarev machine gun. You barely fit this on the camera, but you'll see a great big flash suppressor there. Vented barrel shroud. With barrel has cooling vanes on it. Very, very slim design, just with that big rear sight assembly and that buttstock. And what makes it kind of iconic to those who know it is its magazine. The old dinner plate, as it's sometimes referred to. And maybe the best way to overcome rims getting stuck over each other is to instead place all of your rounds next to each other. So they're rotating around next to each other. The rims are never moving over each other, so there's never an issue. Each one is presented, ready for feeding, and is chambered and fired in sequence, without having to worry about the body of a box magazine moving up in that with a spring where one is on top of the other. It can even be an issue sometimes in bolt-action rifles, but this completely avoids that. They're maybe not the most convenient things to carry on you because they are large diameter, but hey, they're thin and they functioned. And this thing also still shows up occasionally in conflict zones as well. The rather rare and exciting, to gun nerds like me anyway, AVT, the Tokarev AVT self-loading automatic rifle. So this is the fully automatic variant of the slightly more famous SVT 40. So 40 for 1940, and this is the standard, insofar as it never really replaced the Mosin-Nagant, but it augmented it, self-loading rifle of the Second World War for the Soviets. This fully automatic variant was not a huge success, largely because, well, it's a downside of the 7.62x54 cartridge, but also any cartridge in its class, like 7.62 Nato, is it's just too damn powerful for firing bursts. Unless it's from the hip as you're entering a trench or kicking down a door or something, if you're trying to shoot at any kind of range, your first shot might be on target, the second one will be over their heads, third one will be heading toward the International Space Station. In terms of feed, in case you're wondering, you don't need a pan magazine to feed this cartridge. You just need some clever geometry, and you can quite happily stack just like a Brand magazine. Think of the old curved Brand magazine, where you can see the curve on this one, and that is designed to prevent those rims from ever crossing over each other. The Dragunov, the SVD, is really important. I mean, the AK clearly is even more important, but this thing, this whole concept of a squad designated marksman or a section sharpshooter, really is pioneered by this thing. Early 1960s, you can actually see the magazine on this thing. This is the same geometry as the old SVT, ABT magazine. Different design, but they copied the geometry because, hey, that's what works with this vintage round that we have here. And again, no issues there that I've ever heard of with feeding the SVD. If we're talking about the limitations of the rim cartridge, really, the least problematic way to use it is with a belt-fed machine gun. This is an early PK. Most veterans watching will probably have come across more in the way of the PKM, the modernized form, without the fluted barrel, with a different flash hider, which is a lot less hefty than this thing. Now, surprisingly enough, belt-fed machine guns predate the invention of this cartridge. The Maxim machine gun patented in 1883, and it's designed from the outset for a traditional rimmed cartridge and to pull it backwards out of a cloth belt and shove it into a chamber. So there is no issue with machine guns. So the Maxims come along. We still have today sightings in the Ukraine conflict of the Russian Imperial era PM 1910 Maxim, and that's still trucking away, pulling these rounds backwards out of its belt. So it was absolutely no problem for Kalashnikov, it was him again, and his team, to come up with essentially a flipped upside down Kalashnikov rifle mechanism married to a very effective belt system and an excellently light, capable design. It's maybe not as is typical, it's maybe not as precise as a well-maintained GPMG. You can have an argue in the comments over which you think is best, but let me tell you, a number of people will argue in favor of this thing, and it's still using that 7.62x54 round, and its modernized form, the PKP, the Peshenek, still uses that same round.